In the early days of the Second World War, one of Hitler's most successful U-boat aces, Otto Kretschmer, sinks dozens of Allied ships.
Torpedo 1, fire! Go!
First alone, then as part of the lethal Wolfpacks. Until a fateful mistake
Abtauchen, Männer! Abtauchen!
threatens everything. In World War II, subsea weapon allows warriors to fight from beneath the waves with cunning, force, and tenacity. Their enemies strike back. Revolutionary, but still sometimes primitive. It's a desperate bid to change the course of war. Their stories are legend. July 8th, 1940.
Torpedo 1, fire! 1, los!
Nazi U-boat U-99 has sunk an Allied merchant ship just south of Ireland. Now a British escort turns in pursuit.
When you attack the enemy, you are the hunter.
Abtauchen! Abtauchen, Männer!
And as soon as you get attacked by the escorts, you are the prey.
The crew of U-99 performs a dive to escape. U-boat commander Otto Kretschmer has served Hitler's underwater service since the start of World War II. He's just sunk his 12th ship in 10 months and earned a reputation as the best torpedo shot in the German Navy. He proves ruthlessly efficient. His motto is, one torpedo, one ship.
Otto Kretschmer was not one of the ordinary submarine commanders. He's part of an elite group to really do most of the damage. Not only is he pleasant and skilled, but he's cold as a cucumber.
It's only Kretschmer's second patrol aboard the recently commissioned U-99. He and his untried crew face an explosive initiation.
It's the first time when the cool and calm character of Kretschmer is virtually forged in flames. Because it's the first time when he's attacked by Allied escorts.
The warship that hunts Kretschmer is one of Britain's new Flower-class corvettes. 205 feet long, with a displacement of 940 tons. It's been adapted from commercial whalers to hunt submarines.
So when the war starts, the attack that the Germans launch on British trade is unanticipated, and the British are simply not materially prepared for it, nor are they psychologically prepared for it. And the Brits have to adapt their maritime preparations to deal with warfare that they just are not ready for.
Just after 8 a.m., the Flower-class corvette launches underwater bombs called depth charges.
And when the depth charge exploded, one after the other, they look around in the submarine. Is there something broken? Is the hull still fully intact? They do not only drop one salvo, two salvo, or three salvos, they start attacking for hours and hours.
U-99 is a Type 7 U-boat. First commissioned in 1936, they are 218 feet long and 20 feet wide. Type 7s normally carry 14 torpedoes and a crew of 45 men. Germany produces more of them than any other submarine.
The Type 7 U-boat is actually a bit on the small side. It's developed from the so-called UB submarine, one of the smaller submarines of the First World War. It did have significant seagoing capacity.
More than 700 were built, based on its relatively simple and inexpensive design. The man who deploys the U-boats is Karl Dönitz, Hitler's mastermind of submarines.
I think the best way to understand Karl Dönitz is he's a consummate professional submariner. He lived, breathed, thought submarines all the time.
Dönitz launches his U-boats to key shipping routes in a bid to strangle the British Isles.
This became the core strategy of the German Naval Command, to cut those lifelines, those maritime lifelines, fighting the convoys, starving Britain into defeat.
The whole thing turns into, quite literally, as often been said, a chess match, because you're matching wits with the other guy. Where is he now and where will he be? You've got to be thinking several moves ahead.
Dönitz uses naval intelligence to assign the few submarines he has to locate ships.
There are not many U-boats at sea at this stage of the war. The Germans have had to make choices in their war production, and U-boats were not one of those choices, because, of course, they were planning to fight on land, first in the west and then in the east.
So he had to use these small numbers, and the only thing he could do is to spread them over the ocean like butter on a very big sheet of bread. Therefore, in the first stages of the Second World War, they were still fighting like in the First World War. One submarine on one patrol on its own.
Early on July 8th, Dönitz's U-99 attacked the enemy alone and has been under siege for hours.
Everybody is under stress, so the sweat is coming on their face, dropping down, and if you are under stress, you breathe a lot.
Uncertain of how long the attack will last, Kretschmer takes action to preserve the submarine's limited supply of air.
The commanding officer needs to conserve the oxygen. And so the people get the order to lie down, to sleep. They get biscuits and they get chocolate to get over the situation. After hours, they are probably very fatigued.
Some of the crew don masks that absorb carbon dioxide in an effort to make the U-boat's atmosphere last.
It's almost impossible to imagine what these people felt in this very moment. It must have been horrendous.
But as another salvo hits, the man who commands the U-boat appears unfazed.
Kretschmer was sitting very calm and reading a novel, a criminal novel. And the guy on the hydroacoustics, Kassel, was looking at him and he thought, oh, that's a great guy. We are under the pressure. He's just sitting around, reading his novel. After some minutes, Kassel again is looking at him, and he realized the book is upside down, so he can't read, and all the time he did not flip any page. So Kretschmer, in this case, was a brilliant military leader. I can take the time to just read a novel, so you could keep calm too. When the attacks are going on for hours, Kretschmer had to keep in mind a lot of different things. The first thing is to keep the submarine in a depth where it doesn't get destroyed by the pressure of the water. and therefore he needs propulsion. And to produce propulsion, he needs to use battery energy.
Submerged, 124 battery cells power U-99's propellers and all its systems. They can only be recharged on the surface. 12 hours after the depth charge attack begins, Kretschmer and his crew remain pinned down.
Kretschmer is told by his engineer that he's running low of battery fuel.
So, Achtung Leute, wir werden einen Kurswechsel vornehmen. Auf 207.
Kretschmer must make a move, or U-99 will be lost to the sea.
To wait until the battery is totally down, then there's no chance of surviving.
During the 12 hours of depth charge attack, U-99 has been cruising just fast enough to maintain a constant depth to conserve power.
To keep his submarine moving, he needs the propulsion, and therefore he had to use the battery fuel in an efficient way as long as possible to keep the boat on moving for propulsion or for operations.
Weiter runter und den Kurswechsel nicht vergessen auf 270.
Jetzt! Noch mehr!
As his batteries die, Kretschmer risks the last of his power on a course change in a final bid to escape.
Kretschmer and his crew try to evade by zigzagging, changing depth, and the likes.
More than 14 hours after the attack began, the sound of enemy propellers fades.
And then they had the information that the escorts were moving away.
U-99 survives 127 depth charges.
Männer, bereit machen zum Auftauchen.
Battery fuel was extremely low and oxygen was nearly disposed, and therefore he had to get up.
When they surface, the escorts have moved out of sight.
It is said that the air is yellow-greenish, and the author of one famous novel about Kretschmer, he explains, looking like the death leaving the submarine. He was one of the first German commanding submarine officers to have an experience of a long-lasting depth charge. He was lucky, so the escorts really disappeared.
To the east, the man in charge of Germany's U-boats gains a critical win. Hitler's troops have invaded France. Dönitz can use its Atlantic ports to launch his submarines.
After the fall of France in 1940, the Germans suddenly possessed new bases ideally suited for attacks on the British convoys in the Atlantic. Before that, they had to send out their boats from their bases in Germany, which meant they would spend a lot of fuel for traveling to and fro those operational areas. And so now in France, the boats had considerably more time for actually hunting and fighting the Allied convoys.
On October 13th, 1940, Dönitz deploys U-99 from Lorient, France. Intelligence has learned 34 enemy ships transport timber, steel, and other war materials in a convoy from Canada to Britain.
A convoy is a grouping of ships, a number of ships together, escorted by a number of warships. You might think that putting a lot of ships together is a lot of eggs in one basket, but actually, because the sea is such a big place, if you concentrate shipping, then it's very difficult for the enemy to even find them. And when they find them escorted with warships, and it's a hard job to attack them.
Kretschmer and his crew raced northwest in search of convoy SC-7.
All convoy routes have their own designation. HX, Halifax. SC, slow convoy, for slow ships when they start convoys for slow ships. So it normally means something, and it helps divide convoys up.
Dönitz assigns more U-boats to join Kretschmer in locating the convoy. It's one of the first mobilizations of a Wolfpack, a tactic that Hitler's submarines would make famous.
The essence of the Rudeltaktik, the wolf tactic, was to bring several submarines to bear against the convoy.
The control of the Wolfpack is done ashore at Dönitz headquarters. It's on the big board, you got a big plot and little pins and move submarines around. Think of it as a kind of vast drift net of submarines at about twice the visibility distance apart one from the other, deployed perpendicular to the line of advance that you'd expect convoys to follow. And the idea is simply to use it as a kind of tripwire system so you can snare them.
Another submarine to join the hunt is U-100. The U-boat is commanded by Joachim Schepke, friend and rival to Kretschmer and U-99. Schepke and Kretschmer were among the first to complete Dönitz's elite submarine training. 13 months into the war, they rank among Hitler's U-boat aces, cunning men driven to sink Britain's ships.
The number of aces in the U-boat fleet is never very big, and they do most of the heavy lifting. If you look at the success rate for German submariners, about 3/4 of the tonnage is sunk by like 20% of the captains, because they're prepared to take things right to the edge.
But can these lone wolves hunt as a pack? By fall of 1940, a new era of submarine warfare has begun. Admiral Karl Dönitz counts on aces Kretschmer and Schepke to deliver on his new Wolfpack tactic. Germany has only 27 operational submarines. Nearly 1/3 of Dönitz's active fleet is at stake.
His strategic objective is tonnage sunk per U-boat day at sea. It's also a logical strategy. It's just about the only one they've got. But it means you do have to sink ships. You have to destroy their carrying capacity.
Attacking a convoy presents the perfect opportunity. The 34 merchant ships of slow Convoy 7 are protected by only 4 escorts. Their main weapon for detecting U-boats is sonar, an active pinging system also known as ASDIC.
Echo bearing green 20, drawing right.
ASDIC was invented towards the end of World War I. It uses sound pulses called pings to search the ocean for submarines.
The big innovation in the fall of 1918 was the introduction of an active acoustic location system developed primarily by the French and then shared with the British. So what you have is that stuff you see in Hollywood movies where a sound goes out, it hits something and it comes back, and you measure the distance, and that gives you some idea of how far away the object is.
It was the key to the existing anti-submarine tactics of the Royal Navy. A submerged submarine, in fact, was vulnerable. But the biggest drawback is that it doesn't work against surface vessels. And when a submarine becomes a low, hard-to-detect surface vessel at night, it soon proves to be a very dangerous enemy indeed.
After convoy SC-7 is intercepted, Kretschmer and the rest of the Wolfpack close in.
And then the order would be given that at the right moment in the dark of night, you're free to attack. And then the pack would come in. There's a lot at stake, not simply in sinking the ships, but in creating that shock effect and demonstrating to the British that they can sink their shipping at will.
Schepke and the other commanders prepare to fire from outside the convoy.
Wir haben viel zu lange drauf gewartet.
But Kretschmer has his own plan.
Einmal die Geschwindigkeit bitte. 1000 Meter.
At 10 p.m., U-99 slinks past the escorts to ambush the enemy from where they least expect it.
Kretschmer has this killer instinct. He is a perfectionist, so he finds a way of sneaking in on the surface into the convoy. He manages cold-blooded to sail inside the convoy and then starts to torpedo the merchant vessels.
Torpedo 2 und 4 laden.
Torpedorohre 2 und 4 besser.
Wieder Feuer. Los!
First knowledge they have there's an attack taking place is when an explosion strikes a ship and flares start to go up. Then the escort has to react.
The Allies target the convoy's perimeter, where the U-boats usually prowl. Others in the Wolfpack are forced to dive. But inside the convoy, Kretschmer stays on the attack.
Torpedo 1 und 2, Feuer.
1 und 2, los!
It turns into a pyrotechnic nightmare. They're just sinking ships. Terrifying for the men in the convoy, just terrifying. No one thought that they would actually get inside the convoy in the dark of night and spit death and destruction out both ends at a high speed.
In the early hours of October 19th, U-99 fires the last of its 14 torpedoes. Convoy loses 20 ships while in transit. 80,000 tons of shipping is lost to the war effort. Schepke claims 3 ships, Kretschmer 7. Many more than any other ace, and one of Germany's first Wolfpack offensives.
It's a radically new kind of use of submarines that the Brits simply do not have defenses for. Once the Wolfpack snares a convoy, it's chaos for the Allies.
Die Brücke gehört ihnen.
A few days later, U-99 docks to a cheering crowd. Kretschmer and his fellow commanders are celebrated as idols.
The German U-boat aces were used by the German war propaganda, of course, as propaganda heroes. You can almost like them to the pop stars of their days. In any war, it's very much the same. You need heroes. You need successes. to raise the spirit of your own folk.
In Britain, war strategists raced to thwart Germany's new U-boat tactics.
The British Empire's a maritime empire, and it relies on shipping. Now that's a strength because it means that the British can access the world as far as supplies are concerned. But on the other hand, it means Britain must control the sea.
The Royal Navy reassigns warships guarding the British coast to the Atlantic to protect convoys.
It must not allow the enemy to deny it the use of the sea.
Efforts are also underway to apply a new technology called radar. Radio waves used to detect enemy airplanes to the seas.
In the process of having to make this adjustment, Britain is being bombed. Ports are being destroyed from the air. The Blitz is being launched. It's a very trying period for Britain.
March 1941. Nazi Wolfpacks have dominated the Battle of the Atlantic for 5 months. Now convoy HX-112 steams in transit from Halifax to Britain.
HX Halifax. HX-112 was the 112th fast inward-bound convoy. It was composed of different kinds of ships, tankers, cargo ships, etc. And one of the features which makes this convoy interesting and significant is that for the first time the U-boats are facing a well-trained escort group.
Overseeing the 7 escorts that guard the 41-ship convoy is Commander Donald McIntyre. McIntyre has proved a shrewd hunter since he captained his first British patrol vessel in 1935.
McIntyre was focused on U-boat killing. That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to sink submarines.
McIntyre took command of HMS Walker a few weeks before. The lead destroyer and one of Britain's first dedicated convoy protection fleets, Escort Group 5.
It was a very risky business, not only to serve on a warship or a merchant vessel, but also to travel the Atlantic. There was also this constant threat of being attacked by a U-boat and facing a gruesome death.
"150 miles south of Iceland, McIntyre faces the first assault against convoy HX-112. A U-boat cripples one of the convoy's prized oil tankers. Critical fuel for Britain's war effort burns.
Tankers are always spectacular targets. They go up in huge bouts of flame, and this tanker was no exception. It made a great impact on McIntyre, who said, you know, it was rather a depressing sight to see this huge explosion taking place, and it showed that the U-boats were mounting effective attacks.
Before diving, Lemp transmits the coordinates of convoy HX-112 to U-boat headquarters. Dönitz deploys Kretschmer and Schepke in a Wolfpack to intercept.
All the first round draft picks, all the key characters are in this convoy battle.
But one of the convoy's escorts also carries a new weapon rigged to foil U-boat tactics. McIntyre's warship fleet includes the HMS Vanoc, recently fitted with radar. A technology that allows ships to locate submarines on the surface.
Vanoc was one of the first destroyers to be equipped with a radar system. And this was entirely new and a new threat to the U-boats. Now they could be detected at night at the surface.
Unaware of this critical development, Germany's top submarine commanders prepare to attack.
They have had great successes against poorly escorted convoys. Now the tide is beginning to turn, but they don't know that yet.
March 16th, 1941. Having located the convoy, Kretschmer plots his creep into HX-112. U-99's commander scans the fog with prize binoculars made for an ace.
As an ace submarine commander, Kretschmer has been presented with a rather higher standard of binoculars than other captains. And they're part of his ability, especially at night, to seize targets on the surface. And it's a very important part of Kretschmer's self-image that he has them.
Kretschmer must use his sharp eyes to avoid an accidental crash with an enemy ship.
The North Atlantic in March is not a very hospitable place, and you get mist and fog and so on, and therefore it's going to be quite difficult to attack. But Kretschmer was a person who liked taking risks. He wanted to get inside the convoy. That was his tactic. Get inside the convoy, target-rich environment, sink everything in sight. And he tries to do this despite the weather conditions.
By 10 p.m., U-99 navigates the fog to land inside enemy lines, where none of the convoy escorts would expect to find a Nazi submarine.
Alle Mann auf Gefechtsstation!
Alle Mann auf Gefechtsstation!
Avoiding underwater detection and cloaked in darkness, Kretschmer and his crew are ready to strike.
Torpedo 1, Feuer!
Los!
They attack at night, on the surface, when the Aztec doesn't work, the sonar doesn't work. And therefore, they create chaos, they create a certain amount of shock effect, and large numbers of ships have been blow up in quick succession.
Torpedo 3, Feuer!
3!
Torpedo 4, Feuer!
4! Los!
Aboard the lead British escort, McIntyre scans the perimeter for the U-boat that's ravaging his ships.
If the escort gets a sniff, it can strike against the pack. It can push it off and maybe get through the night with very few losses.
But at 1 a.m., another submarine is detected. McIntyre spots Shepke in the customary position outside the convoy. The British destroyer steams toward its target at 34 knots.
Jungs, wir schaffen das! Die schaffen das nicht, die kommen hinten lang!
Nearly twice as fast as U-100 can speed.
Auf 10 anblasen!
Nearly overtaken on the surface, Shepke's only option is to try and hide beneath the waves.
In such a battle situation, you can't think for hours and hours over what to do next, and so made this split-second decision to evade an attack by the destroyer by diving.
McIntyre summons HMS Vanoff to join him in a depth charge attack.
Depth charges are very large explosions. And if they occur close to the submarine, then they do a lot of damage.
Valves become untied, water leaks in, controls burst, bulbs burst. All kinds of damages are inflicted.
Wir haben ein Leck, ein Leck!
The damage is overwhelming.
It leaks so badly that if it doesn't come up, it's probably going to sink.
On McIntyre's ship, HMS Walker, the sonar operator struggles to ping U-100, with the Aztec system in an ocean distorted by explosions.
The sea is a very complicated environment, and of course, if you're dropping depth charges, it's quite hard to actually separate the depth charges from the submarine. Another problem was that Aztec faced forwards, and your weapons were dropped over the stern, the rear of the ship. So this means that when you're attacking a submarine, there is a gap between your losing contact and the depth charges actually being dropped, and then you have to reacquire the target.
Nearby, HMS Vanok uses its first-generation radar to scan for U-100 in case it surfaces. The new technology could deliver a target, but its application is limited.
The first radar they put in service is the Type 286, which is a 1.5-meter radar fixed to the masthead. The essential problem with Type 286 radar is the target had to be straight ahead. You couldn't turn the antenna, so you had to point the ship.
Just after 3 a.m., Shepka pops up 1,000 yards away from the escorts, betting he can repair the flooding and limp away to safety. In an incredible twist,
Contacted ahead.
he lands directly in front of the first radar system able to detect him.
If they'd been a little bit left or right or some other place, the 286 on the masthead probably wouldn't have picked it up.
Vanok races head on.
The commander decides to ram the U-boat.
Beruhigt euch! Wir schaffen das nicht! Wir fahren hinten lang!
Having picked up a surfaced U-boat on its newly installed radar system, the British ship Vanok resorts to a standard First World War tactic and charges to ram the damaged submarine.
The destroyer hits the U-boat U-100 amidships and it smashes the conning tower. And Shepke is crushed with his legs between the hull and the periscope, is thrown into the water and is killed. And the U-boat is lost.
Aboard U-99, Kretschmer is oblivious to the fate of his fellow ace. Out of torpedoes, U-99's crew clears the convoy to head for home.
This is a classic Kretschmer attack. 5 ships sunk, so he seems to be doing well. But now the training of the escort force comes in. They carry out what they can of a systematic search.
As U-99 slinks away, Kretschmer's lookout spots McIntyre's destroyer.
Zerstörer! Alarm! Alarm!
In a panic, the crewman is convinced they've been discovered.
Männer, abtauchen!
On the crewman's warning, the submarine dives.
When he saw this destroyer extremely near, he simply expected that they would have been detected by the destroyer, and so made this split-second decision to evade an attack by the destroyer by diving.
McIntyre's lookouts were unaware of U-99. But as the submarine descends, the destroyer's sonar comes into play.
They're listening all the time, and they're playing this kind of deadly game of cat and mouse. The sub's down here and he's listening to you ping off him. And at some point, because the sonar beam is fixed, it's going to sweep over the sub.
New contact. Range 400 yards.
Once it can be picked up on ASDIC, it can be attacked with depth charges.
McIntyre's crew launches its underwater bombs in a bid to sink the submarine.
They threw the depth charges and they detonated near the U-boat, causing extreme damage.
With controls failing, their equipment and gauges shattered, Kretschmer and his crew plunge towards the sea floor. and a severely wounded submarine.
They got two options at that point. You blow ballast and get out, or you become a bottom feature.
Kretschmer's crew attempts to blow out water to raise their plummeting U-boat.
The only way of escaping was returning to the surface. So this was the decision Kretschmer made, simply to save the life of his crew.
But the air valve is jammed.
He's forced down. In fact, he goes down very deep indeed. It looks as if the submarine is going to be crushed.
205.
The crew monitors their descent.
210.
To their horror, they drop deeper and deeper. 20 feet below crush depth,
190.
the valve finally gives.
180.
The U-boat begins to climb.
195.
On the surface, a determined McIntyre waits for the submarine.
As soon as she surfaces, she's engaged with gunfire. A certain amount of damage is inflicted, and it seems as if the time has come for U-99 to be abandoned.
But from the sinking submarine, Hitler's top U-boat ace orders a final transmission.
After his luck has run out, Kretschmer still is this professional. He sends a last message to Dönitz, very short, simply says, depth charge, 2 destroyers, 53,000 tons, Kretschmer.
That last message he sends from the submarine, have sunk a number of ships, some odd 1,000 tons leaving the sub, Kretschmer. That's just an indication of what a cool customer he actually was.
More than 5 hours after U-99 launched its attack, Kretschmer orders his crew on deck to prepare for surrender.
Kretschmer, I think, to calm his crew, lights a cigar, just to show that he's still in charge. He signals to the British to take off his crew. And the British will do that, because there isn't much hatred man to man. Once the submarine's sunk, that's the job done.
Kretschmer is the last one pulled aboard the British destroyer. McIntyre claims the Ace's binoculars as his prize.
Kretschmer is treated very well on board HMS Walker. He plays bridge, he's plied with whiskey. They're very pleased that they've captured somebody so distinguished.
Kretschmer spends the rest of the war as an Allied prisoner. The battle against convoy HX-112 cost Dönitz 2 of his top submarines.
When Kretschmer and Schepke go down in March of '41, that's a catastrophic development for German public relations. You've trumpeted the success of these heroes, and now all of a sudden they're gone. And the flip side of that is that the Brits actually appear to be giant killers because they've taken them out. It's tragic that they lose them all in a very short period, but you still got lots of young, very capable submariners coming along. The German submarine fleet is by no means done. It's really just getting started.